So, why did you choose to fight in Israel in 1948?
Well, I have here a description by an authoritative writer, namely myself. And first I'll read something, then I'll look up and answer your questions. I asked myself the same questions, why did I go? As in every country, initially, I decided after I was a student in Berkeley, and I decided to in '48, and I decided to go over. Why? As in every country, after every war, here too a legend has grown around the roughly 800 to 1,000 American men and women who clandestinely joined the Israeli Army, Navy, Air Force, and Medical Corps, that all of them were heroic idealists willing to sacrifice everything for the cause of the Jewish state. Of course, in actuality, the motivations were much more complex. As described with only slight exaggeration by novelist and screenwriter Harold Livingston, who was a pilot, American who was a pilot in Israel, it said, quote, Ben-Gurion's Foreign Legion, they took anyone, misfits from America, English communists, South African Zionists, Soviet army deserters, Polish noblemen, ne'er-do-well soldiers of fortune. If you want adventure and excitement, come on over. If you want to write a book, if you're running from the police, if you want to get away from your wife, if you want to prove that Jews can fight, if you want to build a new state. As for myself, my reasons for going were mixed too. My time as an American combat infantryman in France and Germany during World War II had left me feeling restless. My early exposition during the mid-30s to Zionism in a Jewish school and youth organization in Berlin had left an imprint. And because the new Jewish state only comes every 2,000 years, I figured I might not be around for the next time.
And can you tell us what you're reading from? Is that, where did that appear?
This is an article I'd written. It's entitled Israel Reborn, We Were There. And I wrote that about 2 years
And
ago
that appeared in
for
the
the Jewish Journal.
For the Jewish Journal.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had mixed feelings. You were going for adventure. You were going because you believed in Zionism.
Yes, it's like asking why do you fall in love? You say they're usually a mixture of reasons, and this one, that's why I try to spell it out, that the simplification is the same about American soldiers. Well, these heroes just wanted to lay down for free speech and the ideals of the founding fathers, and of course that's simply not true.
Right.
That people don't act on one. And this, too, was, as I mentioned, a combination of a certain restlessness after serving in World War II, certainly some of the Zionism of my youth, and really also to be a part of history that, I put it jokingly, only every 2,000 years, so if I missed this one, I probably wouldn't get another chance, but you didn't have to be a particular observant Jew or a fanatical Jew to realize that this was a historic land.
And you were not, but you were born in Berlin, and you had to leave Germany in 1939 because of Hitler. Was there any sense of, I don't know what you want to call it, vengeance? I'm staking our ground here.
That would have been more valid in World War II. That was what might have been a reason, but at this point, no. It was really just the historical sense, and also the belief that indeed the Jews needed a land where we can see it now, and then. Rising anti-Semitism in many parts of Europe, and that it's not, anti-Semitism is dead, and Jews are going to be scapegoated wherever they are. So that there was a necessity for a state of their own.
So how did it come about? You decided, I want to fight. I think this is something I want to do. What do you, how does that happen? Do you meet someone in a basement somewhere? Because it was illegal as an American citizen.
Yeah, it was
correct?
illegal. As a matter of fact, under the laws at that time, even voting in a foreign election could result in the loss of your citizenship, and certainly, and for me as a naturalized citizen, that this was doubly. But I didn't really worry much about that. Actually, then Congress decided this had not been a real war or something, and technically you hadn't think. And the only people who were deprived of their citizenship and had criminal trials were the people who ferried airplanes and so on, and also people who recruited, like the guy who recruited me. And no, it was sort of half comedy, because I declared my intention of going in the beginning, and somebody told me, go to the Butchers Union in San Francisco, and there's a business agent there, and he'll tell you where to go. I went there, and I knocked on the door, and I went in, and I said, I'm so-and-so, and I'd like to go over and fight in Israel. And he blanched. He said, we've set up a very elaborate system of you go to this telephone booth, and somebody directs you to a bathroom and so on, and here you just walk in. And he said, no, I'll get it for sure. But nothing happened during the summer, and then I had to decide, I was in my junior year at that time, whether I was going to finish my college education or go to Israel. And if nothing happened, I finally just bought a train ticket to New York, and they had something called the Land and Labor Office, which was a front. Supposedly you were going to work on kibbutzim or work the land. And all the passports in the people on the East Coast and the major cities said on it, not valid for travel to Palestine, because they figured that. In San Francisco, they hadn't heard that yet, and I got my passport, mine didn't say it. So I went to the Land and Labor Office, and the guy said, do you have a passport? He said, yeah. Does it say not valid for, no, I said it doesn't say anything. Okay, he said, we have a boat leaving in 2 days. Can you go on it? And I said, yeah, I brought along some, basic clothes. And they said, yeah, okay. So I was on the boat, which ironically was chartered by the State Department to bring students to, eager students to think.
So wait a minute. With the passports that said not valid for travel to Palestine, that was stamped.
That was stamped in
on everybody's passports.
No, on those of guys like myself, who they suspected we was Jewish. They asked him, where do you want to go? Well, I'm going to study in Paris and Argentina. And so they, especially in the East Coast cities in New York and Philadelphia.
I see.
So,
interesting.
yeah.
Did you discuss this with your parents? Who were German refugees?
Yeah, right. I didn't really discuss it. I just give it as a fait accompli. I did it. And my mother, who had been the president of the Women's Zionist Organization in Germany, I think, supported it. I don't know how my father really felt about it.
How old were you at this point?
This was 48, so I was 23.
Okay. So you got on this boat.
I got on the boat.
And was it filled with people like you?
Well, no. There were 3 other people who were going, and we were told beforehand not to let on that we knew each other. So we went through the charade of, oh, yes, my name is so-and-so, and oh, yeah, I'm going to study in Paris too. What are we going to? And since I had been writing for the Pelican, for the Berkeley Humor magazine, so I was put in charge of writing the ship's newspaper. These were all primarily students genuine students going to Europe, and this also had the loudspeaker for the ship and this little room. And one record that had all the anthems of the United Nations. So I played that over and over, and I can still hum the martial air of Latvia and the Congo, I think.
So you were on there, And it went, did it stop or it went straight to?
It went to
Palestine?
Le Havre, no.
Okay.
And there's somebody from the Israeli, whatever, underground, met us and took us to Marseille to camp called Las Arenas. And they were a mixture. They were refugees, mostly from African countries, some Holocaust survivors, and people like us from Britain, and some from France and from America.
So then you went from Marseille to Palestine?
From Marseille, we went to. Did you want me to go in detail on this?
No, I'm just mean. I
Okay.
mean, generally they just
Yeah.
generally you
No, we
you
went.
sort of
Yeah, we were put on a ship called the Pan York, and this was actually during an armistice period between the fighting, but still, the British Navy was out looking to stop ships like ours, so we all had to stay under deck until we left out, and okay, I'll skip this. Some adventures there, but when we got in, all the genuine refugees went through a control. The Israelis had figured out a roundabout way for guys like us who were not refugees going to the army. So we went around the United Nations police there, and it took us at trucks to what had been a British base called Sarafan, not far from Tel Aviv, and we sort of waited there. And at that time, especially for foreign volunteers, it was a little bit like the Middle Ages, where the lord of the castle rounded up peasants and said, if you fight for me, you get an extra bushel of wheat, or you can do it. And he said, okay, and you pick your own men. And in my case, I waited a few days, and then some guy who had been an American major, Lester Gorin, now it just passed, and he said, we have an Anglo-Saxon anti-tank unit, and like you to join. I said, what's your inducements? He said, well, for one thing, it's going to be a democratic unit. Everything goes by vote, except during actual combat. Everything goes by majority. We don't wear any ranks. No, we don't salute and things like that. That appealed to me, and so he took me by his jeep, and we got there, and I saw there seems to be something missing. I don't see any anti-tank guns except a wooden dummy gun. He said, yeah, we don't have any, anti-tank unit doesn't have any guns, but when the infantry captures a gun from the Arabs, we'll give it to you, and then you're in. So they actually had a British gun used in World War I, a 17-pounder, and they gave it to us, and this was pretty, ancient stuff. Skip forward a little bit. At the fighting, there was something called the Fallujah pocket. There's a Fallujah in Iraq, but this was in the Negev, and we had encircled a large few companies regiment of Arabs, and they were led, as we found out later, by a guy named Colonel Nasser, who later became president, and they fought quite well. And one day we got a shipment, and they said we got real guns, and they were real 50-millimeter anti-tank guns. And we tore off. They were so new. We took the oilcloth off, and there, staring us in the face, were giant swastikas on the barrel.
Oh my gosh!
And they had been made by the Czech intended for the German army. Unfortunately for them, the war ended, and they had all these surplus stuff, and they sold it for good money to the Israelis. But I always thought if the highest definition of irony is a bunch of Jew boys shooting a swastika labeled gun.
So when you were, I think you said this was an all English speaking group.
It was
right?
an all English speaking, and if you use loosely, we had Brits, we had Canadians, South Africans who were the best types. We had at the end a couple of guys who'd taken a slow boat from Australia, which took almost the entire length of the war to get there, and and also Americans, and to say, I think the South Africans were the best, the most competent of the lot, and the rest of them I could understand pretty well, except the lads from Yorkshire in Britain, whom nobody could understand, not even the Brits.
How long were you there?
Exactly a year.
You were there a year. So were you there when the state was declared?
No, it was in May, and I came in during the late summer.
So, how were you fighting most of that time?
We actually didn't use it against any tanks. We used it primarily against fortifications and gun emplacements, and but not for the intended use, because I didn't. My major part was really we started in the northern Negev, and then and this was then toward the end of the war. We went down the border between Jordan and Israel along the Jordan River until we arrived at the Red Sea, and what is now Eilat was a deserted place, or a non-existent place called Rashrash, which had one hut to mark the border between Egypt and Palestine. And as we came over the rise of a hill, we saw this pristine, beautiful blue sea, and the mountains were reflecting colors on it. And we hadn't washed or bathed for 3 or 4 days, and then we just ripped off all of our clothes and naked dove into the Red Sea.
Wow. So you came home, well, how long before it was declared a state?
I came about 3 months after it was declared a state.
You came home?
I came home a year. I came home. I actually stayed afterwards and worked on the kibbutz for about a couple of months, and then came home in time for when the semester started in Berkeley.
So did you? I guess the question now is: did you feel you had to have a personal stake in Israel, or is that too idealistic or abstract?
No, I do think. Well, let me say a couple of things. One is that despite the matter before and the somewhat phony romanticism that is true of veterans here in America, that every guy who spent a job behind a desk during the war is a war hero, and despite that, there was a sense of accomplishment, and probably it's the most important thing I did in my whole life, and you felt really, some like the men at Valley Forge maybe felt that you really were in at the creation of a state, and we also felt, in retrospect, erroneously, that was it. This from now on, the problem was solved, and we could go back to a number of them stayed, mainly South Africans, some Brits, but we could go back to the flesh pots and go finish our college education or make money or something, because from now on everything was settled, and of course it turned out
70
not to be.
years later.
Yeah.
So, well, you didn't have an urge to stay there then, to live there?
Not really. We found out in later on. Mom and I went to spend a year at the Weizmann Institute, and though it was a pleasant place, it's easier to die for Israel than to live there. It's a tough place. It's a very competitive, high energy, and my saying at that time was, it's a country without any Jews, you'd probably be bored to death, but a country of only Jews, you'd climb up the wall like that.
But you married an Israeli.
I married an Israeli.
All right, well, that's great. Anything you want to add?
Not really, except that people probably in any war in which foreign volunteers, and that's probably true of the French during our Revolutionary War, or the Americans who went over during the Spanish Civil War, that they tend to be, you have usually a mixture of some who are truly very idealistic and other people who just have personal problems to solve, or can't find themselves and so on. So it's difficult to make them all. But I think on the whole, we had a pretty good bunch of people, and I think probably most of them, whatever their cynicism or afterwards, that you don't get to be in the creation of a state many times in your life, and that's, I think, something I'll always be proud of.